Well, I'm delighted to be talking to John Rutter today, and is our president of the Bach Choir. He has been that for 17 years or thereabouts, and just is such an important part of our organisation. Our members absolutely love working with him, and not just singing his music, but him also conducting concerts that he puts on as well. I found myself being offered the post of musical director in 1998 and succeeding the great David Wilcox. People say never look behind you, but this was a moment in my life when I suddenly thought I really must, because stepping into his shoes for now it has been 25 years, I've been very aware of how important his work was with the choir. John, you knew David Wilcox better than I did, and of course I was thrilled to be taking over from him all those years ago. Can you just sort of say a little bit about your relationship with the Bach Choir?
It goes back a very long way. I must have been no more than 15 or 16 years old when I first attended a Bach Choir concert in London. Young Mr. Wilcox had just taken the helm, and it was a new and exciting period in their history. It was, I confess, the Christmas concert, and there I was in the Albert Hall, and I never thought that one day I would end up as president of that illustrious choir. I think more than any other choral organisation I can think of, they've embraced excellence, continuity and renewal. They're now swimming in a very different river from the one that they were in when I first heard them in the 1950s, when there was, how shall I put this, a certain complacency in the choral world. There was a need for standards to rise and for choirs to accept new challenges. It was probably the case that large choruses had a repertoire of no more than half a dozen different choral works. And of course that's massively expanded. It did under Sir David Wilcox. They set their sights upwards and have continued triumphantly to do that under David Hill. We all thought David Wilcox would be a hard act to follow, but my goodness, David Hill has done it. And as he says, you never want to look backwards in some ways, and gosh, they have looked forwards. We have now a very different, more flexible, more willing to accept change Bach Choir than we had then. And of course, what's been interesting is that the variety of work they have undertaken has so hugely expanded. You can hear them on horror film soundtracks. They have now and again been involved in backing pop artists. Of course, actually, that does go back to Mick Jagger, doesn't it, in the Wilcox era in 1966. Yes. But that side has come along. And, of course, contemporary music is now meat and drink to the choir. They have always been quick on their feet, and I think that's one of the distinguishing features of the Bach Choir, that you usually only ever have to tell them anything once. And to just see how that has developed under David's tutelage in these 25 years has been immensely rewarding. And as president, of course, my role is really just to stand back and admire, but I have the good fortune now and again to guest conduct the Bach Choir, and they are just about the fastest choir on earth.
The Bach Choir, John, love working with you, and of course we're coming up to a very important concert on the 15th of November when they'll be singing once again, and done many times, your Requiem. Just tell us a little bit about that and what were the influences in writing it?
Well, every 2 years, the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra and I give a concert in St. Paul's Cathedral, which is, of course, a very special experience indeed. Christopher Wren's masterpiece is the most inspiring place to make music. It has a magisterial reverb of almost 9 seconds. And so whatever you perform in there seems as if it's echoing round the vaults of heaven. And of course, at Remembrance Tide, A requiem is in every way an appropriate work to be singing in that great space. My requiem is sort of a work that points two different ways. It can be done in quite an intimate setting, but it can also be done on a large scale with full orchestra, and that's how we'll be doing it on the 15th of November. But David, it's not the only requiem that the Bach Choir will be singing during the month of November.
That's right, because on the 2nd, on indeed All Souls Day, we're going to be singing the Brahms Requiem in the Royal Festival Hall with the Philharmonia Orchestra that night. So we're going to be preparing these two works together, and in a way, I mean, dare I say, you didn't choose the Requiem text per se, the Latin one, some of the movements, but certainly Brahms didn't, and there are sort of similarities between them. Was that something that you were conscious of when you were writing yours?
I think any composer writing a requiem is conscious of the requiems that have been written before. And in the Benjamin Britten War Requiem, you will hear echoes of the great Verdi Requiem, and that was absolutely deliberate. He was paying homage, because just as when somebody dies, you reflect backwards on their life and their achievement. And so I think in music, it's perfectly okay in a requiem to look backwards. And Brahms certainly did do that. It harks back to some of the funeral music written by his great German predecessors, such as Heinrich Schütz. But at the same time, it's absolutely Brahmsian. Where I think it's quite different from the intent of my requiem is that Brahms is really focusing on the idea of consolation for the living, the idea of bereavement and loss and eventual comfort. He's not really directing his gaze up to the souls in heaven. And I think in a way, my requiem does that slightly more, somewhat in the tradition of the Fauré Requiem, perhaps, which was probably the model I might have had most in my mind, in that my requiem makes a journey from darkness into light, but focusing not just on us left behind, but on the souls who are departed. And Brahms, I think, would have felt that that was the subject of a whole nother work. And his Requiem is unique. He only used the title Requiem really for want of something else to call it. His original idea was that it would be called a human Requiem, ein menschliches Requiem. And in the end, he called it ein deutsches Requiem because the text is all from the Lutheran Bible. And of course, that again is a difference because the text of most of my Requiem is in Latin, but I've interspersed bits of English, as did Benjamin Britten in his War Requiem, which incidentally was the only time I ever sang with the Bach Choir. And the year was 1963. It was the iconic recording of the War Requiem with the Bach Choir, and the boys' choir was provided by my school choir in Highgate in North London. And so we were there upstairs in the balcony in the Kingsway Hall with the Bach Choir downstairs. It was rather a remarkable occasion, an epoch-making recording, and that's about to be reissued in a new audio format. And that will bring renewed attention not only to the War Requiem, but to the Bach Choir's contribution to it. And that will also happen in the month of November. So it's rather timely. And meanwhile, here and now, the Bach Choir will be singing Brahms. And then I hope no invidious comparisons will be made. They'll be singing my own humble Requiem in St. Paul's during the same month, which should leave them hoping for something really rather upbeat at Christmas time. David, I've conducted the Brahms Requiem a number of times, and what always strikes me is that every time I hear something different in it, some aspect that never quite struck me in the same way before. And now you've conducted it more often than I have, including, 7 or 8 performances with the Bach Choir. Does it strike you in the same way?
Yes, it does, actually. I think every time I go to it, and then, I I try to feel as if I'm looking at it as a new piece again. I mean, that sounds a little bogus, but it's true. And thinking about the way that he's so masterfully constructed the piece, and making sure that the tempi and so on really do relate. But I think most of all, I've also played in it as an organist. I've also played in it as a violinist at Chetham's, and I've been as a sort of accompanist for it, and also played the duet version. And tried to sing tenor with it, by the way, at Chetham's. So, and through all of these different forms of being involved with this extraordinary work, it feels a part of me, funnily enough. And so I'm really looking forward to this opportunity again to get inside the work with the choir on the meaning of the words at the time, the Germanic nature of it in every sense of it, the harmony, the conjunction of the harmony with the words and so on. And and I think it's such a wonderful play for the orchestra. There's nothing in it for certainly for a top orchestra to cause them ever a problem with this piece. So it's a question of how you shape it in terms of sound and pace and feeling. So yes, it's in my DNA in a kind of way over a very long time.
And I feel it's like a companion on my life's journey, that as I grow older and conduct it, so the work seems to change with me, in a sense, that I'm just viewing it from a different perspective. Would you ever guess that it was the work of quite a young composer, David? I don't think I would.
No, because it has the hallmarks of an extraordinary mind working here, isn't it? And someone who himself was pretty ambivalent about belief in anything as in afterlife and so on. But I think thinking of loss of a parent and so on, writing in a particularly kind of intimate way, and it's not surprising in the sense that he was very happy that a piano duet could accompany a small choir doing this, and indeed I've recorded it with a small choir and a reduced number of orchestral musicians, and there is an intimacy to do it in that way, as there also is to have a huge symphony orchestra and the organ backing it in the way we'll be doing that on November the 2nd. But I think it's a piece for all seasons and for all reasons.
And the most important quality, it seems to me, is the compassion and tenderness. I can't help feeling Brahms was an awfully kind man. He was gruff and perhaps had difficulty expressing feelings in words, but in music there's a gentleness. He never had his own family, of course, and I think he would have loved to have had one. He'd have made a wonderful father, and it has that fatherly tenderness, which is there whether you perform it on a small scale or on a large scale. It shines through, and that's why I have to say I always, as a listener, end up in tears.
And what a stroke of genius to end it as you begun the work, giving it that sort of finality to it. And that
you come full circle, but you have been on your journey.
Yeah.
And at the end, his conclusion is, they shall be comforted.
Absolutely.
Those who mourn.
Yeah.
Don't worry, it's going to be okay.
Absolutely. And that's a message for humanity, isn't it?
Oh, today more than ever.
More than ever. Thank you, John.